Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It is Monday, October 13th, 2025. And as I announced last time in my most recent video on October 10th, this is a Q&A video. In the October 10th video, I invited questions, and I know it hasn't been long since that video, but I'm going to record this video today and post it hopefully very soon. For now, we have we have about 5 questions, or maybe 5 people, 5 individuals, kind individuals. Their questions are mixed with very kind, encouraging comments about the YouTube channel. So thank you thank you to the people who submitted questions. I'm going to respond to them now. I'm going to share the questions on the screen, read them with you, and then I'll pause and respond to each individual. Okay, let's begin. The first person is Ijaz Husseini. Ijaz writes, "Hi Davood, hello. It's my first comment and question here, although I've been on this channel a while. Great. Glad to hear from you. As a reader for almost a decade, I still haven't figured out how to quench my thirst for fundamental understanding of different genres of books. Literary fiction, philosophy, world history, psychology, poetry, religion, and so on. What would you suggest as how to navigate this? And which books would you recommend, or would be your recommendation?" That's a very ambitious list you have there, Ijaz. Literary fiction, philosophy, world history, psychology, poetry, religion, and the fundamental the fundamental thirst for a fundamental understanding. The first thing I would say on that is that we should probably maintain it. I would want to maintain my own desire for more, for more understanding, for a deeper understanding, including a deeper understanding of fundamental, foundational issues, elements, components, and an understanding of what that desire itself is. What is that desire about? What is it that we gain when we gain a fundamental understanding of something? For me, that type of understanding is associated with philosophy itself, theory, including literary and cultural theory, and criticism. That fundamental understanding is the thing that allows us to sort works in literary fiction in terms of relatively better and relatively worse. It's when we understand what it is that makes something a work of literary fiction that we understand what it is that makes it a good work of literary fiction, or a typical representative work of literary fiction, or a representative work of literary fiction from early 20th century, for example, or a work of literary fiction that was published between the 2 world wars in Germany. So that's fundamental, relatively more and relatively less fundamental features. Now, what I would recommend. So first, the thirst. I wouldn't want to quench it completely. When we satisfy the thirst, we wait for it to come back because we want to keep moving. That's how I feel about it. Recommendations. I think for each of these genres that you've listed here, there are works that go to that foundation of the genre, or describe it, or try to elaborate it in terms of theory with a theoretical lens, critical lens, philosophical lens. So that would be my answer. When it comes to literary fiction, I would suggest works like Milan Kundera's The Art of the Novel. That's a great book. A great novelist reflecting on the genre, the history of the novel, what it is that it is accomplished by a novel. Great book. I should read that again soon. With philosophy, there are many good, interesting works that address what philosophy is itself, and they're written by philosophers. One that I have here, that I picked as I was thinking about your question, is a book by P.F. Strawson titled Analysis and Metaphysics. Strawson is a very accessible, clear, good writer. And this book, which is subtitled An Introduction to Philosophy, is a good introductory text for people who are relatively less familiar with philosophy, but it's also a great read, delightful, full of insights, a lot of great distinctions and discussions if you have some familiarity. So I'll just read the table of content, some of the chapter headings. It begins with analytical philosophy, two analogies, reduction and or connection, basic concepts. That discussion of what it means to understand or explain something, for some people that might mean you reduce them, you cut the ties with other things. But for some other people, or for another approach, it could mean connecting, enriching the thing that you're trying to understand. That is, for me, it's a hugely important insight, and it's one that I applied in my own 2019 book, Experimental Psychology and Human Agency, which is a critique of experimental psychology, a critique of its reductionism. Chapter 3 is more and quine. Chapter 4, logic, epistemology, ontology. Chapter 5, sensible experiences and material objects. Chapter 6, classical empiricism, the inner and the outer, action and society. Chapter 7, truth and knowledge. Chapter 8, meaning and understanding, structural semantics. Chapter 9, causation and explanation. Chapter 10, freedom and necessity. Freedom and necessity, which connects us to other disciplines like psychology, psychoanalysis. They are also concerned with freedom and necessity, the tension between them, the contradiction between them. World history, I'm not as familiar with, unfortunately. So if anybody else has recommendations, let us know. Extend the conversation here in the comments. Psychology, for our purpose, I would recommend once again the two books by Danish psychologists Niels Engelstedt and Jens Mamen. The two books are Catching Up with Aristotle by Jens Mamen and A New Logical Foundation for Psychology by Jens Mamen. Sorry, Niels Engelstedt, Jens Mamen. I hope I said the names correctly, corresponding to each work. Poetry, I haven't read enough poetry, unfortunately, but I loved reading that book, Hatred of Poetry by Ben Lerner. Religion, similarly, I grew up religious, and I had religious studies courses throughout my childhood and teenage years. No, I don't know enough to recommend anything. So hopefully that's good for now. We can follow up in the future. Thank you, Ijas. Next we have Noah Thomas. Noah writes, Davood, I've been a long-time viewer of yours. I really appreciate the work you do on this channel. Thank you, Noah. I have a more personal question and a question of scholarship. First, what advice would you give a young academic from a rural, uneducated background who wants to pursue a PhD in the humanities, history in my case? I feel as though I am always striking it out completely into the blue unknown, with the only guideposts being my own passion, curiosity, and a few professors who have mentored me. It is very difficult to imagine a life as a professor, especially in this moment as a US citizen. So I'll pause and I respond to this question first, and then we will move together to the next question. Thank you, Noah. Yes, you're right. It is difficult, and you're very right to point out that our imagination is actually under assault right now. Everything that is going on in the world, we are slowly losing our capacity, our ability to imagine certain desirable futures for ourselves, certain desirable paths, individually and collectively. But that work of imagination is part of what we are supposed to be doing, both for each other and for ourselves. The humanities, pursuing a PhD in humanities is going to be challenging. You might end up in a position similar to mine, which is it's not the worst that can happen to a person, where you have to support yourself, your own interests, your scholarly interests, by having a job, by working, having another side of your life where you make a living and then you have maybe 1 hour a day, an hour and a half, 2 hours on a good day to read, reflect, write, and discuss with people who inspire you, encourage you, and challenge you. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I don't know your background, your upbringing, but I just talk about my own to the extent that I relate to what you said. I was also very harsh previously about my own upbringing, my own context, the context where I found myself as a kid, and my path, my meanderings, and realized I was not really equipped early on to distinguish quality and lack of quality, and that led me down paths of making a lot of mistakes, making incorrect judgments about me maybe choosing a mentor. I have come to the conclusion that I shouldn't be as harsh about my own history, about my own past. You used the phrase uneducated background. We have different kinds of education. I would say ultimately it's about connecting whatever accomplishments we have in the future and in the present. It has to also be connected to our history, to who we are, including the parts that we may not like, or initially we may not find helpful, useful in our path. We might see them as handicaps, but they're not. I mean, they should be translated into strengths. And often, sometimes they can be. Not always, but sometimes they can be, more often than we might think. So, and that just makes the whole story more, it gives it a different kind of momentum, a different kind of meaning and significance. And it makes you more powerful when you don't, when we don't deny and dismiss parts of our own history. And especially in the humanities, that's really key. I think you're doing a really great thing, connecting with people who inspire you. I would recommend you keep doing that as much as possible, and protect that little time that you have to pursue your interests, and also be practical. Sorry if it's a little bit banal, boring answer, but we must be practical too. Okay, your second question, Noah. Have you encountered any good example of psychohistory? It seems to me extremely relevant that historians ought to learn psychology and apply its understandings to the decisions of historical agents who are no doubt influenced by their own psychology. And yet psychohistory has fit very uneasily in the field of history and has been largely rejected, often on many valid grounds of psychohistorians overstressing truly unknown, unevidenced psychological factors. Yeah, great question. I think you're right that psychology may fall into the trap of becoming a pseudoscience when it overstretches itself into sociology. I mean, the grand narratives of human development, evolutionary psychology. It becomes too big of an umbrella. It explains too much, but actually it just expands. One of the major things that it's expanding while expanding itself is it's expanding its own blind spots. In terms of psychohistory, I'm not as familiar with the field as a whole, but the person who comes to my mind is Erich Fromm, who you're probably also familiar with. His major works like the Escape from Freedom, Sane Society. These are an attempt to understand shifts at a sociological, cultural level, but with connection to a psychological understanding. Shifts at a level of psychology that are also at a collective level. So psychohistory is always necessarily, I would say, also sociological. It can't help but be also sociological and generally multidisciplinary. So I would also turn this question to other people who might be listening to us. If you have any such suggestions other than Eric Fromm on psychohistory, let us know in the comments below. But it's quite an interesting, and despite its risks, I think it's an interesting field. Okay, let's turn to the next person, who is W. Van Winkle, or Van Winkle. They write, "Hi Davood. Firstly, I wanted to say that recently, around 2 months ago, I found your channel, and I found it helpful in understanding Freudian psychoanalysis, which I started familiarizing myself with in the May of this year. I've had trouble understanding some of Freud's works, but after watching a video of yours on that specific work, it helps me understand it better." I'm really happy to hear that. Okay, let me keep reading. Think of a shattered plate, which would be the knowledge I gained from reading Freud, and from watching your video, it helps me piece the shattered pieces together into a coherent understanding of that work. Since I started reading Freud, I have read The Psychopathology of Everyday Life, Totem and Taboo, Ego and the Id, Beyond the Pleasure Principle, on the Introduction of Narcissism, 3 essays on the theory of sexuality, on Mourning and Melancholia, Why War, Civilization and its Discontents, and a few other smaller works. Wow, great progress. With that out of the way, I wish to ask how important dream analysis is to Freudian psychoanalysis, as you might have noticed that I have not read The Interpretation of Dreams in my list, and I am slightly dreading the idea of reading it, despite it being a fundamental work of Freud due to its length. We are getting back to fundamentals, like the first question. I find the language of his older works more difficult to understand, and the ideas less interesting and useful than his later ones. I loved reading Civilization and its Discontents and the Ego and the Id, some of his later works, for example. But I find reading Totem and Taboo dreadful, even on my second reading of it, one of his works that I consider to be older, despite being published around 15 years after The Interpretation of Dreams. Another question I have is that, can you be emailed for advice around psychoanalysis, or for you to look over and give your thoughts on a psychoanalysis of a certain subject, media, or philosophy? That's about it. Love your content, from Estonia. Thank you very much. Okay, so yes, you can email me. Just know that I'm not an expert in psychoanalysis. I'm not a psychoanalyst. I am just a reader, somebody who enjoys texts by Freud and some other psychoanalysts. And another way in which I am I'm gaining slowly familiarity with psychoanalysis is by undergoing psychoanalytic treatment myself, which I have found immensely helpful in clarifying some of the concepts, because sometimes you don't realize the depth of a thought, a depth of a concept or a proposition when it's presented to you in an impersonal way. When it shows up in a personal, intimate way, it can really shake us. Now, about The Interpretation of Dreams, yeah, it is a foundational text. It is considered foundational not only by scholars of Freud, but by Freud himself. Freud wrote, he updated and revised The Interpretation of Dreams, which is like a way of returning to it, fine-tuning it. So he considered it as a kind of a wellspring, a core around which other insights are organized. Similar to some other writers, I believe he also has a shorter version of The Interpretation of Dreams. It's called something like Psychology of Dreams or Dream Psychology. So it's similar to like Kant's first critique of pure reason, that was followed by Prolegomena to Any Future of Metaphysics, or David Hume, a treatise on human nature, followed by an inquiry concerning human understanding. Maybe I got that wrong, but Freud also has that one big magnum opus followed by a secondary treatment, a shorter version of it. So maybe begin with that one. One last thing I would say is let the motivation gather in you. I mean, sometimes you just need to spend a little bit more time with the works that you like in a writer like Freud. Just spend more time with those works that you find manageable, accessible, enjoyable, and the time might come from those texts, from your engagement with those texts, you might find the momentum and the drive to keep going to a work like Interpretation of Dreams. Yeah, and approach it not like a list that you need to complete, like check, check, check. Approach it more like, I'm reading this text now, and maybe I'll have the drive, the desire to keep going and venture into that dreadful texts. Okay, thank you. Mark Faridani. Hi, Mark. He writes, question, in a world of dumbed down pseudoscience where being an intellectual is stigmatized, where science is painted as conspiracy, and where being a decorated academic pays less than being a TikTok shop or operator, I wonder how you manage to stay so interested in studying these deep questions. I always enjoy your content and appreciate what you do for your audience, the time you spend preparing and providing such thoughtful video essays. Thank you. Also in awe of your dedication to elevating our rudimentary understanding of these very challenging questions. I don't know how you manage to do it. Please keep it up. Well, thank you very much, Mark. That's very kind of you. It doesn't seem that way from my perspective. From my perspective is like I'm trying to elevate my own understanding of topics, and I'm not always motivated. Obviously, when I turn on the camera, I'm usually motivated to do it. If I'm not motivated, I usually don't do it. So you don't see that the other side, the darker side of, not darker, but the times that I'm relatively disheartened, discouraged, and so on and so forth. And I catch my interest. When I find that I'm interested in something, I catch it and I ride that wave. And I try to be kind to myself and have some curiosity. I try to be gentle with it, not discipline myself too much. But yes, as another person pointed out earlier, we live in a difficult time. Like Noah said, it's hard to pursue academic intellectual interests, but we support each other when we do this, when we do it, especially when we do it publicly, when we do it rigorously in the public. It's an encouragement. Hopefully other people see it, and I'm encouraged by other people. People like Greg Sadler, Cadell Last, Daniel Tutt. There are many people. O.G. Rose. It's an ecosystem, and it is maintained and improved as a kind of not coordinated, but a collective effort. And yeah, and I think it deserves to be protected. We do those other things so that this also can, partly because this thing can also go on living. Thanks again, Mark, for writing and for being there. And last but not least, a comment from Tabish Ansari. He writes, Dear Davood, I'm a very new subscriber. I subscribed only today. Great, welcome. But I hope that still qualifies me to ask a question. Yes, of course. First, I should state that I stumbled onto your channel by searching for a review of Byung-Chul Han's books, and I immediately liked the quality, the feel, and the vibe of your channel. Today, I checked out your website, and I learned that you've been an academic who now works in industry. Yeah. From your CV, I could sense the adventurous journey that many young academics undertake, often straddling multiple continents. From your soothing accent, I guess that you're Iranian. Yep. I have some Iranian friends. Great. Now you have one more. And that's where my question comes. For the starry-eyed and ambitious young researchers, scientists, academics who are from the global south and do not possess a strong passport, how tough is this journey? Especially when we have to do enormous paperwork even for a tourist visa, let alone a work permit in a developed country. As per your bio, you've lived and worked in many countries and then finally returned to Canada. Was Canada always home, or you decided to make it into a home? How difficult was this transition? I'm asking because I feel like I'm in a similar situation as you. I can gaze at a future where choices, compromises will have to be made in terms of where to live and what to work on. Sorry for rambling, no worries. But I would appreciate a lot if you could talk a little bit about your journey and experience. Many thanks. That's it. Tabishan, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for commenting and opening up. Let me see how much I can say. So you picked up on that word returned, the way I say return to Canada. That return, to be fair, is a return with a small letter R. It's not a capital letter return. That capital letter return is probably going to be somewhere else. It's going to be Iran. And the capital letter is going to be returning to the dust from which we were made. But yes, it's been a difficult journey. It's been, from in my perspective, I feel like you never fully settle as an immigrant. You never really, I never felt the way I felt back in Tehran. I occasionally feel that when I'm among friends here, among a group of friends who know me and I know them, and we have an understanding and sympathy. So I decided to make Canada a home. It's a decision, and it's been challenging. But life is challenging in general. You have to choose between which challenge you. If we are lucky, we can create a choice, and say, okay, I don't want this challenge. I want this other challenge. But it's what difficulty we choose to embrace. That's what is at issue, not whether difficult or not, whether easy or difficult. It's going to be difficult either way. That's what I believe. For me, coming to Canada first about 20 years ago, close to 20 years ago, it was difficult. I couldn't do it in one go. I had to go to Turkey, live there for 1 year. I lived in Malaysia for about 2 years, and eventually managed to come to Canada. The cost of being a student was manageable because I came as a permanent resident, as an immigrant. So I could get student loan, which I recently finished paying back. In Canada, that's quite manageable. It's not as huge as the U.S. So I got student loan, and during the very first summer, I was lucky enough to get a research position, funding for research position, so I didn't have to go work in a minimum wage fast food restaurant, which would have been the alternative. So all summers from the time I came to Canada, I had research assistant position, and then I got funding, scholarship for my graduate work. When I was, I still have, I'm in touch with some of my former students who were my students in China, in Macau. And the way that some of them manage with the difficulty of moving to the more developed countries is they create a substantial track record before doing that. So they do their masters, some of them do their PhD, and then having lots of publications, having lots of skills, they then apply for postdoc positions. So that's one path, that's one way to do it without immigrating from an earlier point. What else can I say on that? Choices and compromises. Yes, they're part of the journey. At least they have been for me. And don't lose heart. Is that cheesy? But don't. It's tough. That recognition of the difficulty, when it doesn't crush your spirit, that's not cheesy. It's an ongoing battle, and it's an ongoing accomplishment when you manage to do it. And I hope that it works out for you at whichever stage of the journey you are. and feel free to get in touch with me. In one of the questions that somebody asked me, they asked if they could email me, and the answer is yes. I write my email here on the screen now. Feel free to reach out. I'm not always quick to respond, but I will read and I will respond if you prefer more personal, like email correspondence. That's it. Thank you again, everybody, for your questions. We'll do this again, maybe at the next milestone or maybe earlier on. I have two things in the near future. One is an interview I did with the UK-based psychoanalyst Berjanette Jazani. Editing the video currently. Hopefully I will make that available soon. And I'm very slowly working on the next part in the beginning theory series, which is on feminist theory, why it is important, why we should not dismiss it. That's all. Hope you're all doing well, and for now, goodbye.